What's up, everybody? I'm Chunky P, and this is how I compose the soundtrack for Suck It Up on GarageBand. What? What? Okay, so before we begin, I'd just like to say that I'm a fraud! Whenever it comes to composing, I very much would like to call myself uneducated. I don't know a lot about music theory, and I don't really know how to stick to a key, but I do know what my ear likes, and oftentimes, a lot of the music I make is just what I think sounds good. Because I think anybody can make music as long as they know what they like. So how do you start? Whenever it comes to starting that first track, I always seem to ask the same question of, what's your vibe? What are we looking for here in terms of inspiration or similarities to other games we're doing? And for Suck It Up in specific, one of my leads, Gavin, gave me Stanley Parable and Doom. So you can imagine I had a lot to work with here. And this is the part where it's important to realize what your role is on the project. You have leaders and you have people that you're going to need to send your music back and forth with, so you can actually make sure it's sticking to the theme. So from then on, what I normally do is kind of build a little Pinterest board of references just on Spotify instead. So for Doom, it had that thrash metal, which I heavily referenced for that guitar riff that I ended up using for the Suck It Up soundtrack. More on that later. In contrast, for the Stanley Parable soundtrack, I noticed that it definitely sits in the background a lot more than Doom's soundtrack, because the whole point of the game is you talking to that narrator and having a lot of dialogue. You don't want the soundtrack to kind of overpower that. So for Suck It Up, that actually worked perfectly, because our game is all about you sticking it to the man and fighting back against your company. So of course those strings would be in the background, but of course they'd also still be there because you're back in your office setting. And since I'm already getting into it, that's kind of where you start forming a purpose for your soundtrack. Like for Stanley Parable, the purpose is to sit in the background and kind of provide that extra bit of noise to the actual gameplay and you talking. In contrast, for Doom, the soundtrack is there specifically so that you keep playing the game because it's so good. So, mashing those two together, Suck It Up is kind of leaning onto the Doom side of you need the soundtrack to kind of propel your gameplay. But apart from that, the soundtrack, I realized, needed to propel the gameplay. Which means now, I can get into my process for actually making... I'm titling this section Creating a Library because above the actual music itself, if you can't tell by now, I love being organized and I love focusing on that preliminary work so that the ending is really smooth and really satisfying. You can ask my team back from when we did Game Jam, that was exactly how it played out because it took forever for me to get that demo, and then once I did, it was like I made 3 tracks in the next 2 hours. Once I'm actually in the program and I've done my preliminary work, I've done my research, I start looking at what instruments I want to serve what purpose. For Suck It Up, I have a couple instruments in particular that serve general purposes for the entire soundtrack. For a quick example, let's look at this growly, bassy synth that I use. Mainly, I'm going to be using this synth to kind of represent authority in general. It has a very crunchy, bassy tone to it, and it kind of hits you in the face whenever it's used. I feel like it takes up a lot of the track, and I can't have a lot of other instruments around it, which I feel like works perfectly for if your boss walks in and you're doing something you're not supposed to. When it comes to actually making my melody, I don't like to have the pressure of just staring at my screen and having to come up with something. Normally it's a little more loose than that. I'll be playing guitar, showering, or cooking. That's normally when my best ideas come to me personally, but everybody has their own way of doing things. But once I do have my melody, it's time to throw it in GarageBand and see how it works with everything else I have going on if I've already started making stuff past that. For Rip and Torn, we ran into a little bit of a roadblock with the GarageBand guitar. This is the part of the video where I'll show you how to outsource a little bit. And I'm gonna call this one Workin. I'm about to introduce you to my partner in crime. Crime. That's a C word. What else starts with it? Catzap! Also known as Parkrala. They helped me with the guitar on all of these tracks, and I think this soundtrack would have been doo-doo without it. Thank you so much, Park, also known as Catzap on Instagram and Spotify. Please check them out. They are an amazing guitar player. They deserve so much recognition. Please check out Catzap. Meow!
When Carson asked me to lay down some guitar for his project, I said, fine. I did a few different parts for Carson, but I'm gonna focus on the chugs. Cause come on, that's why we're all here, guys. We're all here for the chugs. So basically I just took the audio that Carson gave me and dropped it into Ableton. Yes, I use Ableton. And here's how that guy sounded. Then I found the BPM. It was 155. I got this one, I was like, whoa, that's fast. How am I gonna play that? And the answer is, I cheated. So basically the way I tackled this was to have one track of guitars that is just doing like the rhythm. And then another track over that that's doing like the more melody thing. And for the actual like tone of the guitar, I just use stock Ableton plugins. I know that's like kind of blasphemy for like guitar recording, but it sounds a lot better than what the dry signal is. So here's the dry signal. And here's the wet. Better. It's better, definitely, I'd say. So yeah, that's pretty much it for like this specific chug track. But there were a lot of other ones. I did like arpeggios and harmonies and like that kind of thing. And it all kind of followed the same like similar process as this one did. So yeah, thank you, Carson. I love you.
Thank you, Mr. Zap.
I love you
Okay,
too.
so for this last section of vague wisdom on composing, I am going to be going over how I make... I'm eating ice cream while I film the video. I'm eating ice cream. I see a lot of composers using more than just 2 sections in their songs, and oftentimes it's that third section that really keeps you going. I know Toby Fox does that in a lot of his music, and personally, a lot of the composers that I listen to like to throw in that C section in a song as opposed to just doing A and B, which I think is very standard in lyrical music, but when it comes to video game composition, it is something that is not as common because it can get very repetitive that way. So whenever I'm working on drums, I've split it up into 8 measures, 2 sections of 4 measures, and at the end of each measure is something a little different for each one. And that'll keep your brain kind of going and bouncing back and forth between, oh, this fill is different than the last measure. So I'll pull up an example right here and show what I did in Rip and Torn's track. The drums were very basic, very Doom inspired, and I think I executed a pattern that is driving and will keep the song going, doesn't distract you, but doesn't get too repetitive because I switch it up every now and then with those 4-bar sections of the phone beeping as well. And there you have it. That is my very uneducated process on how to compose. And if you want to send me any music you have, we have a whole Discord channel for it that I'll be putting on screen right now. But that's enough for me. I'm Chucky P. And I'm out of here.